Example, standard deviation. You survey some of your friends to find out how many hours they work each week. Their responses are 5, 20, 8, 10, 35, and 12. Find the standard deviation, and then what does the standard deviation tell you? Now, there is a formula on the previous slide. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use technology. In particular, I'm going to pull up ClassCalc. And in ClassCalc, I'm going to move to graphing mode, where I can choose some statistics. Now, what I'm going to do, and I'll go ahead and write this on the slide, is I'm going to write lowercase a equals open bracket 5, 20, 8, 10, 35, 12. That is, I'm making a list that includes all of my data. And then what I will next select is going to be standard deviation, which is abbreviated STD, standard deviation. I'll write STD open parentheses A to indicate that I'm using that list. And it'll give me the standard deviation of that list. So let me go over to this calculator. I'm going to type in A. On a mobile device, you press and hold, I believe it's number 7 to get a lowercase a. Then we'll choose equals, and then bracket, which I believe on a phone you press and hold the parentheses, but I'll type on my computer a bracket. And now I will input that data. 5, 20, 8, 10, 35, 12. And it says I have a 6-item list, which is what I intended. Next, I'll choose Stat. And from Stat, there's an option for STDEV, standard deviation. If I choose that, on the next line, I choose Stat STDev, which of course, as I said, is abbreviated STD, parentheses. Now I can choose A, and I am given 2 values. One of these is the Greek letter sigma, and one is the Latin S. The S is the one we are after because on our previous slide the formula was for S equals, not for sigma equals. And so that value is 11.027239. So 11.027279. Now in this question, I don't say how to round it, so I'm going to just keep all the decimal places. In a homework question or something, you may be told round to the 100th place or something like that. But that's it. That's us finding the standard deviation using ClassCalc. Now the question is, what does this standard deviation tell you? Well, as we've already discussed on the previous slide, a small standard deviation means that the data is all very close. A large standard deviation means the data is very spread out. And in this case, this actually indicates that our data has a large spread, which if we looked at the data, we could see that, right? The range, or as we found earlier, was 30. That's quite a big range when you're talking about hours that someone works per week. So this tells us about the spread. Spread of the data is, and the value is 11. Now what that actually means, 11 may be a small spread for some data, but here it's a very large spread because that tells us that how far a typical piece of data is from the mean is actually what the definition is there. So a typical piece of data is 11 hours away from the average or the mean value here, which again, when you're talking about hours someone works, a spread of 11 hours is quite big. Example, standard deviation comparison. Ralph and Fred are 2 guys that enjoy bowling. Use the mean and standard deviation of each of their most recent 7 games and use that information to determine who is the better bowler. So Ralph is given to have bowling scores of 165, 175, 168, 175, 180, 171, and 177. His mean is 173, and his standard deviation is 5.25. Fred, on the other hand, has these 7 scores: 115, 168, 185, 290, 105, 100, and 250. He has a mean also of 173, but a standard deviation of 74.28. So if we ask ourselves who is the better bowler, the mean is not the only piece of data that tells us something. So both have the same average score. Their typical game looks like it could be 173. So in that aspect, they are the same. However, the standard deviation tells us something different. It tells us that Ralph, while his mean is 173, that his scores tend to be closer to 173 than Fred. As we see, Fred's standard deviation is 74. So a typical game for him would be 74 points above or below the mean of 173. Whereas Ralph is going to be likely, we're expecting to be within 5 points of 173. So as we're thinking about this, which of these bowlers is better? Which one would you want to have on your team if you're in a tournament? Well, you'd want Ralph, because even though Fred can score better than 173, he can bowl a 290, we know what to expect when it comes to Ralph. So another interpretation of the standard deviation is that it helps us to see which is more predictable, which is going to be more dependable. And so again, small standard deviation means consistency. Large standard deviation means there's a lot of variability in the data.